Welcome once again to Esoteric Guardian. What if the modern world, the skyscrapers, the banks, the governments, is nothing more than the last mask of ancient sacrificial cults? We've been told that modern society rose from reason and progress, a clean break from the superstitions of the past. But when you follow the roots of our systems, laws, money, authority, they lead straight back to blood-soaked temples and priestly empires. In this video, we'll trace how forces of darkness engineered civilization itself, turning entire societies into rituals designed to harvest human obedience. This is a video we truly loved creating, and we hope it awakens many minds, because that is, and has always been, the purpose of this channel. Let's begin. We're taught that modern society stands on reason, that humanity broke free from the grip of superstition, from temples, idols, blood sacrifices, and divine kings, and built something entirely new. Governments, banks, schools, courts are presented as neutral systems created by logic to serve human freedom. But history tells a different story. The first legal codes weren't born from humanist ideals. They were carved into stone by priest kings who claimed their authority came directly from the gods, like Hammurabi receiving his laws from Shamash. These weren't rules to protect individual rights. They were sacred decrees designed to preserve cosmic hierarchy. Disobedience wasn't just a crime, it was blasphemy. The same is true of early economies. The first banks were temples. The same buildings where people brought grain and gold to be stored also demanded offerings of blood, labor, or submission. Debt began as a religious duty, a promise to return life force to the gods who gave it. Even kings themselves began as figures of worship. The crown, the throne, the scepter, all were religious relics before they became political symbols. What's unsettling is how little these structures actually changed. They simply changed language. What used to be framed as divine law became civil law. What used to be temple tribute became taxation. What used to be ritual hierarchy became bureaucracy. The logic stayed the same, only the symbols were updated. And this leads to a question that quietly destabilizes everything. What if modernity isn't a break from the ancient world at all? What if it's the final stage of a plan set in motion thousands of years ago? A vast, invisible ritual designed to extract obedience and energy from the many and deliver it to the hidden few. Once you see the ancient skeleton beneath modern structures, the next question becomes unavoidable. Who built it first, and why? To find the roots, you have to look at the Canaanite world, where power and divinity merged into one figure: Baal. The word Baal meant Lord, and across the Levant, it referred to a storm god who commanded rain, fertility, and the growth of crops. Yet his domain stretched far beyond nature. He stood at the center of dynastic power, invoked before wars, celebrated in blood-soaked festivals, and described in Ugaritic myth as the one who conquered the sea, crushed death, and built his palace on Mount Saphon. Those stories created more than myth. They laid out a system where cosmic order depended on a single divine ruler, and kings used that idea to anchor their thrones. Baal's temples operated as the nervous system of their cities. Priests managed harvests, stored grain, controlled silver, and mobilized soldiers while performing rituals that proclaimed the king as Baal's chosen vessel. Tribute and sacrifice flowed through the same gates, offerings of life that strengthened both the god's favor and the monarch's legitimacy. Each military campaign unfolded as a sacred drama. Victory confirmed divine support, and defeat triggered purges, penance, and renewed ritual to restore the balance. Resistance to the throne became something larger than treason. It was framed as rebellion against the fabric of existence itself. That framing gave the elites an extraordinary weapon. The palace and the temple formed a single circuit, feeding each other with fear, spectacle, and devotion. Kings claimed that their wars preserved the world, their taxes upheld divine order, and their rule maintained the cycle of life itself. Religion ceased to function as belief alone and hardened into structure, a framework that organized labor, wealth, and war as if they were acts of worship. Even when the Hebrew texts turned against Baal, portraying him as a symbol of corruption and idolatry, the system survived. The rituals were denounced, yet their logic seeped into the kingdoms that rose afterward. Babylon, Egypt, Rome, each inherited the same skeleton: sacred kingship, ritual warfare, and economies fused to divine hierarchy. This marked the birth of the temple state, a political organism disguised as faith. Authority spoke with a sacred voice, and faith marched under the banner of authority. From then on, entire civilizations could be arranged like rituals, channeling the energy of millions into the hands of the enthroned few, a pattern that never truly disappeared, only changed its names. After Baal had crowned the king and wrapped power in sacred thunder, another figure rose from the same ancient soil, one that no longer sought reverence but demanded erasure: Moloch. The Hebrew texts speak of him with visceral dread. They mention the Valley of Hinnom, just outside Jerusalem, where children were passed through the fire. Drums thundered to drown out their cries, while the smoke curled toward the heavens as an offering. Centuries later, Roman chroniclers described Carthage repeating the same rites: colossal bronze effigies with outstretched arms, hollowed and heated from within until they glowed red, their bellies filled with flames as the crowd stood in ritual silence. Archaeology confirms the physical layer of these accounts. Excavations at Carthaginian Tophet sanctuaries have uncovered urns packed with the burned bones of infants and young animals, often side by side, sealed with clay stoppers and etched with inscriptions dedicating them to Baal Hammon, the Carthaginian face of the same archetype. Yet even here, the story fractures. Many scholars argue that Moloch might never have been a god in the personal sense at all. The word itself appears strangely in the biblical text, often linked to the term offering or sacrifice. Some suggest it referred not to a deity, but to the ritual act, a title for the offering of children to the state god, whoever wore the mask at the time. If that is true, then it was never a being. He was a mechanism. He was the idea that the community must prove its unity by consuming its own future. And that is what makes him terrifying. Because an idol can be toppled, a mechanism adapts. The ritual operated like psychological architecture. By demanding the life of a child, the core of personal love, legacy, and hope, the hierarchy forced its subjects to dissolve every private bond into the collective. Once a parent had crossed that threshold, they could never return to who they were. They became fused to the system through irreversible loss. This was some source of initiation, a transformation designed to ensure permanent loyalty. Terror alone would not have worked. Fear makes people flee. Sacrifice makes them stay. And that was the true function of Moloch, to forge absolute cohesion through grief that could never be undone. Even resistance became impossible. A parent who had given their child could not rebel without admitting that their suffering had been meaningless, so they clung to the system that had devoured them. The ritual created a population bound by trauma, each person defending the hierarchy that had destroyed them. Because their pain demanded it must have been necessary. Through this logic, the cult transformed agony into loyalty and loyalty into obedience. It became not just religion, but the glue of the entire social structure. When the biblical authors condemned this figure, they thought they were erasing him. In truth, they only erased his name. The architecture survived, mutating through the empires that followed. Rome consumed its youth in ritualized wars, praising death as the price of glory. Industrial powers consumed lifetimes in monotonous labor, treating exhaustion as proof of virtue. Modern economies still frame self-erasure as moral duty, celebrating those who burn their health and identity to keep the machine running. Moloch no longer has temples, yet his design endures. He stopped being an idol and became an archetype, the silent logic that says civilization can survive only if it continually feeds on human lives. No fires roar in the squares anymore, yet the pattern still hums in the background. Invisible altars now sit inside the systems we call normal, waiting for the next offering to walk in willingly. Baal had shown how to crown kings with divine thunder. Moloch had shown how to bind entire populations through irreversible sacrifice. Once those principles existed, the ancient world stopped building cults and began building machines. Mesopotamia was the first laboratory. Its cities rose around temple complexes that served as treasuries, courts, and administrative hubs while wrapped in sacred ceremony. Ziggurats pierced the horizon like artificial mountains, towering over the mud-brick streets as if the gods themselves had descended into architecture. Every harvest, every debt, every life event passed through priestly hands. Scribes carved tax records beside hymns, and clay tablets tracked both rations and omens. Religion no longer drifted above daily life. It ran through the pipes of the state. Belief and obedience became indistinguishable. Egypt perfected that model into something even more absolute. The pharaoh did not claim to serve the gods. He embodied them. His commands carried divine weight, and disobedience meant disrupting the order of the cosmos itself. The colossal temples of Karnak and Luxor functioned as ritual theaters, bureaucratic offices, and logistical centers all at once. Vast priestly hierarchies administered grain, land, and labor while choreographing pageants of divine power. The pyramids weren't only tombs, they were monuments engineered to broadcast eternity, training millions to see the hierarchy as immortal, unchangeable, inevitable. Egypt turned governance into liturgy, and liturgy into infrastructure. Rome absorbed all of this and weaponized it at scale. Its empire fused military might with religious spectacle until the two became one system. Victories on the battlefield flowed back as triumphal processions, saturating the population with images of divine destiny. Bread and circus kept the masses fed and mesmerized, while temples doubled as banks and census offices. Roman engineers reshaped entire cities to stage obedience, forums to gather, arches to glorify the state, amphitheaters to bleed rebels as entertainment. And above it all, the emperors stood as living gods, their portraits stamped on every coin, their decrees sealed with religious oaths. Rome also perfected a new tool, syncretism. Each conquered people saw their gods welcomed into the Roman pantheon, rebranded and folded into imperial cults. This strategy drained conquered cultures of their resistance. By honoring their gods, Rome erased their independence. It created a single spiritual superstructure that stretched from Britannia to Syria, turning belief itself into infrastructure for control. This is where the blueprint crystallized. Divine authority and civil law fused into one structure, and that structure became the germ of the modern state. The old gods eventually faded, yet their machinery stayed intact. Religion had become technology, a system for sculpting human behavior, regulating desire, and transforming obedience into power on an industrial scale. When Rome collapsed, the machinery didn't die. It went underground. Medieval monarchies wrapped it in theology. The church clothed it in divine law. And for centuries, the old temple state survived disguised as feudal order. But in the 15th century, something shifted. Europe called it a rebirth. On the surface, the Renaissance looked like a revolt against superstition, the dawn of humanism, reason, and science. Yet behind the art and the manifestos, ancient mystery schools were quietly reawakening. Hermetic texts, thought lost for over 1,000 years, resurfaced from Byzantine libraries. Kabbalistic treatises began circulating among Christian scholars. Alchemical manuscripts whispered of transmuting not only metals, but the human spirit itself. These weren't fringe curiosities. They became the intellectual fuel of the era. Figures like Giordano Bruno spoke of an infinite cosmos filled with living stars and hidden forces, blending Copernican astronomy with Hermetic cosmology. John Dee served as court advisor to Queen Elizabeth while conducting angelic scrying rituals in secret chambers, believing he was receiving instructions to engineer a divine empire. Paracelsus rewrote medicine with a fusion of chemistry and astrology, presenting healing as the mastery of invisible laws that bound the macrocosm to the body. They saw themselves as architects, not academics, custodians of keys that could redesign the order of the world. And this is where the illusion cracks. The Renaissance didn't mark the birth of science from nothing. It marked the translation of occult hierarchy into a new language. The same structure persisted. Initiates guarding secret knowledge, claiming access to hidden laws that could command nature and society. Only the symbols changed. The robes became lab coats, the grimoires became natural philosophy, and the oath-bound circles became royal academies and state commissions. This was the birth of what could be called the state magus. Individuals who served kings, courts, and empires not only as scholars, but as manipulators of hidden forces, spiritual or material. They built observatories for the crown, created ciphers for espionage, advised on planetary alignments before wars, and coded their discoveries in symbols the uninitiated could not read. The early architecture of science grew out of these same closed circles, still loyal to power, still answering to thrones. The language of mysticism faded from their writings, but the logic remained intact. Knowledge would not be liberated. It would be centralized, weaponized, and controlled. The Renaissance had wrapped ancient mystery schools in the language of science, but their secrets still moved through hidden circles. Over time, those circles stopped revolving around individual magi and began forming networks. This was when the current took shape, a current that no longer depended on lone visionaries, but on organized secrecy. Its roots trace back to the Knights Templar. Originally a military order born during the Crusades, they accumulated enormous wealth, created early systems of credit, and operated a network of fortresses and treasuries that stretched from Jerusalem to Paris. When the French crown crushed them in the 14th century, their infrastructure scattered underground. Many of their symbols and initiatory structures resurfaced generations later inside the first Masonic lodges, which presented themselves as craft guilds, while quietly cultivating esoteric philosophy, ritual hierarchies, and secret alliances. By the 17th and 18th centuries, these lodges had become speculative Freemasonry, no longer groups of stonemasons, but elite circles of intellectuals nobles and financiers bound by ritual oaths. They wrapped their gatherings in symbols drawn from Egypt, Babylon, and the Temple of Solomon: obelisks, compasses, the all-seeing eye, the checkerboard floor. These were not decorations. They formed a coded language of power, a map of hidden authority that only initiates could read. Each degree unlocked new layers of meaning, and with each layer came deeper allegiance to the network above the nation, above the law. As their influence expanded, their fingerprints appeared on the blueprints of the modern world. Freemasons helped draft constitutions, fund revolutions, and construct the first central banks. Washington, Paris, London, cities reshaped their public spaces to align with Masonic geometry, embedding sacred architecture inside the capitals of new republics. Many of the founding figures of the United States openly belonged to lodges. Revolutionary France overflowed with them. Wherever new states emerged, these societies hovered nearby, whispering symbols into their seals and oaths into their charters. Through secrecy, they survived every regime change. Kings rose and fell, revolutions erupted and burned out, yet the lodges endured, invisible, decentralized, and immune to the purges that consumed open institutions. By the dawn of the industrial age, their methods had become the default architecture of power: hierarchies hidden behind neutral facades, networks of loyalty invisible to the public, symbols acting as passwords between elites. The structure that governs modern governments and corporations descends directly from them, a design where allegiance flows upward through layers of secrecy and decisions descend from above like decrees from a hidden temple. For thousands of years, temples demanded offerings to keep the world turning. Today, we call it the economy. The altars changed shape, but the logic never stopped. This system presents itself as rational, efficient, and secular, yet its heartbeat follows the same rhythm as the old sacrificial systems. Instead of demanding blood on stone, it consumes time, energy, and human lives. It doesn't announce itself as a cult because it doesn't need to. The ritual has been internalized. People feed themselves to it willingly, believing the act is noble. Look at how it works. The system rewards those who sacrifice the most of themselves, their youth, their health, their relationships, to keep production flowing. The culture calls this ambition, discipline, success. But strip away the euphemisms and it becomes clear. This is ritualized self-immolation, measured in hours instead of flames. The workday becomes the altar, the office becomes the temple, and productivity becomes the god. Those who collapse under the strain are framed as weak. Those who survive are celebrated as martyrs of progress. Even its symbols betray it. The ancient image of Saturn, Kronos in Greek myth, devouring his children, was not a metaphor of cruelty. It was a warning. Saturn was the god of time, and time devours all it creates. That image now lurks silently at the core of the system. The market consumes each new generation as fuel for the one that follows. Children are raised to be harvested, their creativity drained, their dreams metabolized into output, their identities reshaped into commodities. Progress doesn't nurture them, it eats them. The same ritual logic governs the objects around us. Factories design products to die on schedule, their death planned at birth, a modern echo of the ancient offering. This planned obsolescence turns the entire industrial process into a sacrificial loop. Create, consume, discard, repeat. The object's destruction is not a flaw, it is the point. Like the ancient bull on the altar, it is created solely to be destroyed so that the system may continue. Even the language has been purified to hide the blood. We speak of burnout, human capital, turnover. These are euphemisms for loss, for lives consumed and discarded. Every quarter, corporations celebrate record profits without showing the wreckage of minds and bodies left behind. The system cannot stop because it cannot survive without constant offerings. If the flow of sacrifice ends, it starves. This is why the cult of productivity feels relentless. It is the same ancient structure, now wrapped in numbers and deadlines. An endless ritual that demands more, consumes more, and praises those who let themselves be devoured. Saturn no longer stands in the square holding his scythe. He hides inside schedules, payrolls, and quarterly reports, still eating his children, 1 hour at a time. Once the economy absorbed the logic of sacrifice, it no longer needed whips or flames. It needed programming. Foucault traced this transformation with surgical precision. In the medieval monastery, discipline meant enclosing the body. Bells dictated when to wake, when to pray, when to work, when to sleep. Time became sacred order, and the body learned to obey clocks as if they were commandments. Centuries later, the same pattern reappeared in the factories of the industrial age. The architecture changed. Stone cloisters gave way to brick smokestacks, but the rhythm stayed the same. Schedules carved human life into identical segments, and the machine fed on each one. What had once been framed as spiritual devotion became productivity. The monastery had not died. It had become the office. To make this system stable, obedience had to feel voluntary. Here, the Protestant work ethic rewired the mind. It reframed endless labor as moral virtue, as proof of being chosen, and idleness as sin. This injected the old religious guilt directly into the economic engine. Workers no longer needed overseers with whips. They carried the overseer inside their skulls. Every wasted moment became a private act of shame. Every hour sacrificed became evidence of worthiness. Even now, people boast of exhaustion as if it were holiness. But discipline alone cannot produce loyalty. It only builds submission. To bind people to the machine, the system had to seduce them. This is where modern propaganda was born. Figures like Edward Bernays, Freud's nephew, fused psychoanalysis with mass marketing, discovering how to trigger unconscious desires and redirect them into consumption. The Tavistock Institute expanded these techniques, studying war propaganda and then applying the same strategies to peacetime populations. Advertising stopped being about objects and became about identities. People were taught to buy not what they needed, but who they wished to become. The rituals of obedience turned into rituals of desire, invisible yet constant. Where temples once shaped behavior through sacred fear, billboards and screens now shape it through manufactured longing. The result is a paradox. The modern subject believes they are free, while operating inside a mental cage more effective than any ancient prison. They wake when the alarm tells them, work when the screen commands, consume what the algorithm presents, and call it freedom. Every decision feels personal, yet the framework scripting those decisions remains unseen. The old priesthood enforced obedience through terror. The new one makes obedience feel like choice. Freedom has become the most elegant illusion the system ever engineered. A mask laid gently over the same ritual machinery that has always fed on human lives. After the mind had been trained to obey, the system reached for a master key: time. In myth, that key wears a scythe and a stone crown. The Greeks called him Kronos, lord of duration and decay. The Romans, Saturn, regent of cycles and harvest. Later currents fused his hunger with the archetype named Moloch. Different masks around a single force. Creation measured only to be consumed, children born already on a clock that runs out. Power learned very early that whoever writes the calendar script's reality. Sumer counted months by the moon to time tribute and irrigation. Egypt fixed a 365-day year so the Nile's pulse could be taxed in rhythm. Rome tinkered with months to extend magistrates' terms, and then Julius rewired the year to stabilize empire. Centuries later, Gregory's reforms synchronized Christendom around a single Easter and a single ledger. That move sounds theological. It standardized rents, tithes, and courts with a precision unseen before. Calendars never served dates alone. They routed grain, soldiers, and coin. Daily life followed. Monastic bells broke existence into canonical hours, drilling bodies to rise, work, pray, and sleep on cue. The public clock tower turned that drill outward. City squares learned to move together, curfews locked streets, workshops opened in unison. Mechanical escapements in the late Middle Ages transformed time into identical units, a raw material that could be counted, priced, and extracted. The factory whistle inherited the bell. The punch clock inherited the rule. Taylor's stopwatch carved labor into seconds. Gantt charts chained those seconds to quotas. Bundy's time clock made loyalty legible in ink. Railways forced entire nations to abandon local noon for standard time. 2 noons in one day when the schedules switched, and the 1884 Meridian Conference crowned Greenwich as the planet's spine. One line on a map told billions when to wake. Saturn's metal, lead, haunted the Renaissance imagination as the weight of slowness and melancholy. That mood never vanished. It changed employer. Coffeehouses rose as engines of alertness for traders and pamphleteers, the stimulant sacrament of the new discipline. Time is money, preached Franklin, and the creed spread until quarters replaced liturgical seasons. Q1 through Q4, each with its own feast days, product launches, earnings calls, end-of-quarter sprints, Black Friday. Ancient Saturnalia once inverted roles for a few days so the social order could return stronger. Weekends function the same way. Licensed release, then back to the wheel. Control over minutes created a deeper captivity, perception itself. People stopped feeling time as weather and started treating it as debt. Every idle hour arrived already guilty. Schedules and dashboards reprogrammed attention so completely that the bell moved from the tower into the pocket. Notifications now perform the monastic role. They summon, they correct, they absolve. Algorithms tune the pace of desire, sliding tasks and temptations into the day with the same regularity that bells once divided prayer. The old priesthood threatened souls. The new one harvests focus. Efficiency appears, and here Pisa no moral, as a civic virtue, yet it behaves like liturgy. Meetings at the top of the hour, stand-ups at 9, billing in 6-minute increments, targets that reset every month like ritual ablutions. High performers offer sleep, family dinners, even health, and receive medals named excellence for the surrender. The altar never smokes, though the offering burns. No one calls it sacrifice because the god doesn't need a name. The phrase everyone repeats, time equals money, condenses the doctrine into 4 words. If time equals money, then every unmonetized second counts as waste. Every hour spent without yield demands penance. That axiom converts life into inventory. The machine extends the ritual to things. Designers decree lifespans at the drafting table. Planned obsolescence turns factories into sanctuaries where objects are born already destined for death. A phone dies on schedule. A washing machine fails a month after warranty. A battery sealed shut forbids repair. Destruction arrives pre-approved, so the cycle can feed again. The ancients offered bulls to keep the cosmos turning. Modernity offers supply chains. Even rest becomes a managed commodity. Sleep tracked and scored, vacations timed to fiscal calendars, leisure packaged as countdowns to productivity. Saturn tolerates play the way a landlord tolerates paint on a rented wall, a cosmetic layer over an asset that keeps accruing. Everything returns to the ledger. History writes the same message in 100 scripts. Monopoly over time produces obedience without whips. Calendars align harvests and taxes, bells align bodies, clocks align factories, rail timetables align continents, digital platforms align attention. Each layer tightens the orbit. The scythe never appears, though you feel its curve every time a deadline closes around the day. And still, the hunger grows. Targets roll over, KPIs multiply, sprints follow sprints. Young faces step onto conveyor belts that stretch from school timetables to onboarding portals. Childhood shrinks under extracurricular schedules. Old age dissolves into active retirement that keeps buying hours back from the same market that stole them. A civilization that measures life only to convert it ensures the myth stays fed. Saturn no longer devours his children in frescoes. He signs their contracts, syncs their calendars, and meets them at 9. Once time itself had been captured, the next step became inevitable: to crown new priests who could govern the entire machine. They no longer wear robes or speak of gods. They speak of metrics, risk models, interest rates, and growth curves. Yet their role is the same one carried by the priesthoods of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Rome. The technocrats. They emerged through think tanks, central banks, and transnational corporations, institutions that operate above governments while appearing non-political, issuing decrees wrapped in numbers instead of commandments. Their language is deliberately opaque, saturated with acronyms, formulas, and jargon that render their decisions untouchable to the uninitiated. This is not a flaw, it is design. Like the oracles of Delphi or the scribes of Babylon, they preserve power by making interpretation a privilege. Walk through their architecture and the disguise cracks. Skyscrapers mimic obelisks. Central banks are adorned with sun motifs, all-seeing eyes, and labyrinthine floor plans echoing old temple geometries. Corporate logos repeat ancient sigils: wings, serpents, torches, pentagonal stars, stripped of context, yet carrying the same aura of arcane authority. These are not random design choices. They are markers of continuity, symbols that remind, initiates they serve something older than the institutions themselves. Where priests once guarded grain, they now guard capital. Where augurs once read omens, they now read data streams. Algorithms have replaced divination, and markets have replaced the gods, but the structure has not changed. A hidden priesthood interprets invisible forces for the masses, sets rituals of compliance, and punishes heresy as instability. Monetary policy functions like liturgy, its language incomprehensible to the laity, its decrees binding entire nations. Quarterly earnings calls echo the cadence of oracles, translating market omens into instructions for the faithful. Central banks even stage their pronouncements like sacred ceremonies, cloaked in ritual choreography to preserve their mystique. The financial world has become an invisible temple. Entry requires years of initiation, degrees, exams, clearances, the slow stripping away of ordinary perception until reality becomes spreadsheets and indices. Once inside, the initiate learns to speak the liturgy, the dialect that turns human lives into numbers and numbers into obedience. From the outside, it looks secular. From within, it feels priestly. Every word carries the weight of hidden power. This is the final mask. The gods have been replaced by data, but the altar remains. An unseen hierarchy governs the flow of time, resources, and human energy across the planet, not with thunder or fire, but with algorithms that shape reality as absolutely as any ancient prophecy. The priesthood never disappeared. It simply learned to wear suits. When the technocratic order learned to rule through clocks, indices, and models, something older kept pulsing beneath it, the initiation of its inner cadres. This isn't about harmless campus folklore, it's about loyalty architecture. You rise not only through merit, but by being marked as one of them, pulled into circles that operate on secrecy, ritual, and recognition. This grammar comes from the Hermetic lodges and invisible colleges of the Renaissance, reshaped into private clubs, selective fellowships, off-record retreats, and non-political forums where consensus is manufactured out of sight. Skull and Bones works as an early mold of this culture. Inside its tomb at Yale, generations of future senators, bankers, intelligence chiefs, and judges undergo rites designed to break down their identity and rebuild it under an oath. The stories shift with time, but the structure persists. Dramatized death and rebirth, controlled exposure of secrets, private relics, an internal language that marks belonging. The purpose isn't spectacle, it's imprinting. It seals the line between the masses and the initiated. That seal follows them for life, through scholarships, early appointments, accidental interviews, and meetings that happen without resumes, signaled by a surname and a knowing glance. Across the continent, Bohemian Grove reveals the same skeleton in a different mask. Under colossal redwoods, politicians, media barons, and corporate strategists gather every year to stage the cremation of care in front of a towering owl. The motto, "Weaving spiders come not here," insists no business occurs, yet sociology makes the opposite clear. Trust is forged around the fire. The owl is no random mascot. In classical tradition, it embodies the hidden site of Athena Minerva. In conspiratorial readings, it echoes Moloch. That ambiguity is functional. Symbols work best when only initiates agree on their meaning. The Council on Foreign Relations, or the Bilderberg Group, drop the robes, yet preserve the architecture of exclusion. Entry is invitation only. Discussions operate under strict confidentiality, and attendees emerge aligned on language and direction. They don't draft laws directly. They draft the vocabulary that will appear inside laws months later. No manifesto is signed, yet the synchronization is visible. Phrases seeded in those rooms reappear in think tank reports, ministerial speeches, and newspaper editorials within the same season. It's not conspiracy in the cartoon sense. It's ritualized convergence. The aesthetics still whisper their lineage: owls, torches, laurels, twin pillars, checkerboard floors, compasses, truncated pyramids. They surface across institutional architecture, state seals, and corporate logos. The US dollar bill hides the all-seeing eye atop an unfinished pyramid, flanked by Annuit Coeptus and Novus Ordo Seclorum. It isn't literal spellcraft. It's a signature. The work continues. State heraldry revives Roman eagles, fasces, laurel wreaths, five-pointed stars. Corporate brands recycle sirens, tridents, wings, eyes, and Promethean flames. To the public, they're decorative. To the initiated, they're passwords, visual proof that the current still flows. The shift from medieval lodge to modern network brought a shift in what they guard. Where the old guilds protected the secrets of stone, These circles protect the secrets of process, how to bend regulation, manipulate liquidity, steer public opinion without appearing to. Think tanks, consultancies, banks, and central banks serve as the functional heirs of the priesthood. The robes became suits, the diadem became jargon. A technical note on forward guidance wields more impact than an ancient edict. A closed-door monetary policy meeting can reorder the lives of millions as decisively as a council of priests. Those who speak the dialect, basis points, yield curves, swap lines, macroprudential policy are the clergy. Those who don't, obey. Initiation doesn't end once you enter. It refreshes constantly. A private dinner the night before a summit, a secluded summer estate where alliances are rehearsed, a side room during a global forum where a handful of decision-makers align their verbs. The public scene shows group photos. The inner scene condenses into keywords: resilience, orderly transition, systemic stability. Months later, those same words echo across central bankers, ministers, and media op-eds as if choreographed. No treaty binds them, belonging does. And belonging needs symbols. The owl keeps returning. Wisdom for the few, silence for the rest. The fire returns too, because every strong pact is forged on a pyre, even if today it burns paper, not flesh. Robes, torches, Latin mottos, marble, dark wood. The body understands it has crossed to the other side. From that point, obedience no longer requires orders. Membership governs on its own. A legal financial lattice shields this priesthood from disruption. Foundations, trusts, and shell companies insulate decision circles from government turnover. Agreements are struck under favorable jurisdictions. Agendas are published without substance. Conflicts of interest dissolve under rules of non-attribution. This opacity functions like negative theology. The less visible the origin of a decision, the harder it becomes to question its authority. Meanwhile, the ancient symbolism still breathes in money, flags, seals, and corporate marks. It's not used as a vulgar charm. It works as a thread, a reminder that modern power trained in a lineage that recognizes itself whenever it sees a radiant eye or twin pillars. Crowds walk across checkerboard lobbies without seeing the language. The initiate glances down and smiles. All of it upholds the same operational law that ruled Baal's temples and Moloch's fires. History stays governable only when the table that decides remains small, and entry depends on initiation. The modern elite doesn't need to declare itself a priesthood. It functions as one. It selects, consecrates, purges, marks with symbols, enforces secrecy, and dictates calendars. Its decrees no longer descend on stone tablets, but as policy briefs, market guidance, and model clauses. The form evolved. The logic never changed. And so everyday life, schedules, contracts, apps, campaigns, rests on a summit that still speaks in the grammar of ancient cults. Owls and torches have simply migrated from temple friezes to corporate letterheads. The message they carry to the initiated hasn't changed either. History is not shaped by the many, but by those who have been admitted to the circle. Once the elites sealed their hierarchies and buried their symbols inside banks, parliaments, and corporations, they no longer needed to command the masses directly. They only needed to choreograph what the masses desire. That is what mass culture became. Not entertainment, but ritual. Cinema, music, television, and social media channel collective emotion, the way ancient priests channeled the crowd at a festival. The screen replaces the altar, the premiere replaces the procession, and each release triggers a synchronized wave of attention that sweeps through millions of minds at once. These waves don't just distract, they align. They shape what people dream about, what they fear, what they think is possible, and what they believe is inevitable. Behind the spectacle lies the same logic that once fueled state temples. Orchestrate awe, and obedience will follow on its own. Techniques once hidden in mystery schools now operate under the banner of marketing and entertainment. Subliminal messaging, pattern repetition, symbolic archetypes, the same methods that once guided initiation rituals now sculpt behavior from a distance. Predictive programming goes even further, planting fragments of future realities into films, series, and games so that when those futures arrive, they feel familiar, inevitable, almost comforting. The audience thinks it is consuming fiction. In reality, it is being conditioned to accept the scripts of power before they unfold. Celebrities serve as the priesthood of this new temple. Their lives function as modern mythologies, written and rewritten in real time for public consumption. They rise through carefully staged rites of passage, the breakout performance, the scandal, the redemption arc, echoing the death and rebirth pattern of ancient initiations. Their gestures, clothing, and even breakdowns are treated as omens. Millions study their every move like auguries, unconsciously seeking direction from figures who appear human but are elevated beyond accountability. The priest once stood between the crowd and the divine. The celebrity now stands between the crowd and the algorithm. This entire system runs on sensory saturation. Every moment of silence is filled, every pause colonized by sound, color, movement, notification. The constant flood of stimulation prevents reflection, fragments attention, and erodes the boundaries of the self. The same techniques once used in temple ceremonies to dissolve individuality into the collective trance. A mind kept in continuous spectacle can no longer resist. It can only respond. And that is the perfection of the design. The old regimes ruled through fear. The new one rules through fascination. The masses believe they are choosing what they love, while their emotions are funneled through rituals they don't recognize. Rituals that harvest their focus, sculpt their desires, and return them, emptied, to the machine. Everything in the path we've uncovered points to a single, unbearable truth. The modern world is not a break from the ancient order. It is its final form. Look closely, and every layer behaves like part of a ritual machine. Children are inducted through years of scripted rites, uniforms, bells, grades, exams, a sequence of symbolic deaths and rebirths that strip away instinct and rebuild them in the shape the system demands. The goal is not knowledge, it is conditioning. By the time they reach adulthood, obedience feels natural, even invisible. The transition to work simply deepens the ritual. Contracts replace vows, offices replace cloisters, but the rhythm stays the same. Devotion measured in hours, selfhood traded for status, exhaustion reframed as virtue. Hierarchies crown the structure like temple spires. Initiates ascend through layers marked by language, dress codes, restricted spaces, and coded gestures. Titles function as priestly ranks. Boardrooms echo sanctuaries, hushed, elevated, inaccessible to the profane. Those who climb far enough speak a dialect the rest can't pass. Acronyms, financial tongues, managerial mantras, the modern version of liturgical Latin. Each rung requires a sacrifice: time, privacy, empathy, sometimes conscience. Those who refuse are expelled from the rite, quietly erased from the story. Those who remain are rewarded not only with power, but with the certainty that they have transcended the common world. Even wealth itself behaves like a sacred offering. It flows upward, not outward. The surplus produced by millions is concentrated in symbolic shrines. Stock markets, hedge funds, central banks, and stored as numbers that almost no one ever touches, yet which decide the fate of entire populations. It mirrors the logic of the ancient temple treasuries. The sacred hoard must remain untouchable because its true purpose is not use, but veneration. The priesthood controls it, not because they need it, but because controlling it proves they are the priesthood. Symbols saturate every layer of this order. Logos, seals, flags, emblems. They operate like sigils, shaping perception while remaining half-seen. Obelisks pierce city skylines, pyramids sit on banknotes, all-seeing eyes glow from corporate insignias, checkerboard floors mark courthouses and parliaments. To most people, they are decoration. To those who recognize them, they are passwords, reminders that what stands today is built on the bones of the old cults. And initiation never ended. It simply became invisible. Business schools, secret societies, fellowships, think tanks, each one strips away former identities and binds its members with shared myths of merit, progress, and destiny. Behind the facade of competition lies a single rule. Only the initiated shape the world. The rest serve it. Even time has been absorbed into the ritual. The calendar no longer marks seasons of nature, but fiscal quarters, product cycles, algorithmic updates. The clock no longer tracks the sun, but output. Weeks loop like liturgical circuits. Monday as resurrection, Friday as release, weekends as licensed catharsis before the wheel turns again. The entire planet ticks in unison, synchronized like a congregation kneeling on command. Seen whole, this isn't a society, it is a ceremony without end. Nothing about it is new. Every part of this structure, the sacrifices, the hierarchies, the symbols, the initiations, comes from the same ancient blueprint. It has simply been refined until no one recognizes it as a cult. The priests became executives. The altars became banks. The sacrifices became careers. The chants became data. The myth of progress hides the truth. The ritual never stopped. It only perfected its camouflage. The world did not outgrow the temples. It became one, seamless, self-sustaining, and so immense it no longer needs to call itself sacred. We move through it like worshippers who have forgotten they are praying. And now the final question stands in the silence, the one this entire path was leading toward. If every hour, every gesture, every dream we offer keeps this ritual alive, who or what are we serving without even knowing it? We were taught to see history as a story of progress, temples crumbling, superstition fading, reason rising. But when you peel back the surface, a different shape emerges. Not a straight line from darkness to light, but a circle, turning endlessly. The ancient cults never died. They shed their names, buried their idols, and learned to speak in numbers. Baal crowned kings with divine thunder. Moloch bound whole populations through irreversible sacrifice. Saturn devoured the world's time and chained it to the clock. Their logic flowed into empires, churches, banks, corporations, algorithms. The forms changed. The mechanism endured. What we call modern society is not the opposite of the ancient order. It is its masterpiece. A ritual so perfect it no longer looks like a ritual. A temple so vast it can pretend to be the real world. Every part of life has been drawn into it. Our time, our energy, our dreams, our grief, all harvested, processed, and offered upward to a system that feeds on human lives while convincing us it serves us. The priests became executives. The sacrifices became careers. The chants became data. The fire was hidden inside the machine, and that machine smiles. It rewards those who give themselves to it completely and discards the rest as heretics of efficiency. It does not ask for faith, only for participation. It does not threaten damnation, only irrelevance. The world we inhabit is not secular. It is sacred, not to us, but to the forces that built it. And now the question you were never meant to ask stands in front of you, quiet, immovable, waiting for an answer you may not want to give. If everything around us is part of a ritual that never ended, who or what have we been serving all along?